All right, welcome everybody. This is Culturally Damaged with Chris Parker from Hendry and Parker's law firm and Dan Parri with the Parri Law Firm, who does estate planning, Medicaid, and auto accidents. You can contact him at, somebody's contacting me now, 727 586 4224. Excuse me. And you can contact us at 727 205 5555. I can remember that one. But today we are set to talk a little bit about a very sensitive topic for most people. As you probably know, unless you've been under a rock, there have been sort of a revitalization or a rehashing of gun violence in this country with some mass shootings taking place in both Atlanta, Georgia, and Boulder, Colorado. The sad thing about us getting back out and being more active is that all the bad things that come along with that are also coming back. So, Dan, I noticed you got something in the background there. Are you making a statement?
Well, a little bit of a statement, and it's just, I want people to know that, when we talk about this, that we're not people who despise guns, who have some sort of, agenda here to have guns, eradicated from the earth and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's partly it. But yeah, so I have my rifle, a rifle. I do have multiples, but this is a Lee Enfield. It's a World War II single action or bolt action single shot rifle. And then I do have my little 9mm handgun off to my right here. The magazine is not in there, and it's open and it's safe. So, and there are no children around. But then I also have, it's maybe a little harder to see, but if you squint, you can see some of the different bullets that I do have. So one of them is for the rifle here next to me. Another one is for a Mosin Nagant. That's a Russian rifle from back in the First World War, the end or beginning of the Second. And then actually I do own an AK-47, and the other is that. But you can see the difference pretty clearly. The rounds that are meant for self-defense and handguns, and then the bullets and the rounds that are made for weapons of war, like these other rifles. So you can imagine what those kind of bullets would do. Now the AR-15 type round is a little smaller. It's more of the size of more of the handgun ammunition, but it's the casing though is pretty much as large as the larger rounds, and it's a much more higher capacity round. And so what that means is it can penetrate more. So light body armor and things like that can actually be penetrated by some of those weapons.
Well, people probably assume, based on your political beliefs that have been, that are also behind you, that Black Lives Matter, that you are a liberal and that you therefore are anti-gun. So you're showing that there is gray area, right? This is not a black and white world. Maybe you believe that Black Lives Matter, but you also believe that the Second Amendment matters, and you appreciate your right to own and carry a weapon, and you exercise that right. Is that a surprise to a lot of people who meet you?
Well, I think most people who know me or who've known me for many years, probably not, because obviously my political, or we'll put those in air quotes, views have shifted. Over the past couple years, but it probably is a little bit, with some of the crowds that I run in, with the flags that I fly on the Jeep and everything like that people might be surprised that I would be a gun person. I've grown up around guns, handguns primarily, shotguns. Used to go to the range with my mom and dad and my brother. We'd all go and just, it was for self-defense purposes. But so it's always been, we as younger children, we were taught gun safety and all that kind of stuff. So it's I'm not a hunter, but I have grown up around them and found them to be safe, at least if properly handled.
Now, what do you have and I'm just asking this question because I know that there might be listeners who are asking this question. I've heard this question. Why do you need an AK-47, or why do you want an AK-47?
There's absolutely no need. For a lot of things in life, we do stuff because we think it's cool, or just maybe it's a fascination. I don't want to say that in a bad way, but we all find things that are interesting. I've been somewhat of a history buff part of most of my life. And some of these weapons do have a historical, they've or have played a huge part in world history. The AK-47 is obviously one of them that still plays a role in a lot of that goes on. But from when the stories about Vietnam, and we would hear about the M16 and the AK-47 and different things like that, and so it just became something that it wasn't as common, and I thought it would be kind of neat to own. So actually, I ended up building my own. So it's a little scary.
You built your own AK-47. Now, isn't that a Russian weapon?
Well, the Russians did develop the original, but I think the one that I actually have is Afghanistan, or they've made these weapons all around the world, and that is one of the the I guess not the downsides, but the history of this weapon is that it is so cheap to manufacture as a stamped piece of gun that it has been reproduced just by the millions and millions and millions all around the world. And so most of the wars that are being fought use this, or at least one side is using the AK-47, at least one.
Did you know that the AK stood for Avtomat Kalashnikova?
Yes.
The founder, the person who... Yes. I've always wondered what the AK stood for.
Yeah.
Now, and a lot of people assume that AR and AR rifle stands for assault rifle, but it does not, does it?
I don't believe so.
I don't believe it does either. Somebody probably knows that. AR, what does it stand for? Well, a lot of what we wanted to talk about today, because, I mean, we always have the conversation about guns, and it's kind of, I don't want to say played out, because the conversation needs to be talked about all the time, especially when these types of things happen. But since we're both attorneys, we kind of wanted to come at it from more of a constitutional standpoint and what the history was of why we have the Second Amendment, and the common misconceptions about the Second Amendment and how it's changed over the years. I would encourage everybody that's listening to, when discussing this topic, to kind of try to separate your political beliefs with your constitutional theory or beliefs. Because, whether or not you think that we should have guns and or we shouldn't have guns is kind of not the topic today. The topic is, what did the original framers intend when they wrote the Second Amendment, and how does that affect us now, several generations later, with new technology in a different world that we live in altogether? So I would start off, probably a good starting point would be to see the text, or to read the text of what the Second Amendment says. The Second Amendment, let's see if we can bring it up here. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What's the first thing you think, Dan, as an attorney, when you kind of sparse that out?
Well, obviously, and this is where some of the controversy begins, right? So forget the interpretation of the text and all that kind of different stuff. There's actually a lot of controversy revolving around just the grammar and the punctuation of the Second Amendment.
Very different back then.
What's that?
It was very different back then. Commas were used very differently.
Well, in some states, when they ratified the different amendments and different things, used different punctuation. And so different states actually ratified different versions of this based upon the different. And so when court cases are being cited, I was reading that they actually are, they typically will reference a particular version ratified by this state, sometimes to actually, to justify maybe their reasoning or how they get to their reasoning. Yeah. But,
when you look into that, there's actually 13 states, right, that had their own constitutions. And so there were 13 different versions that James Madison pulled when he wrote the Second Amendment. So is it something that came like right out of his head that he wrote down and scripted out? No, it was more of a kind of a hodgepodge of different constitutional amendments through the different states that was able to be passed. So politics back then was still being played like it is today, where I have to make the language so that everybody's happy. So if you notice, it's almost like it's intentionally confusing or intentionally vague. because it has a first part that says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Now let's talk about that. What the first clause, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. So the big concern back during the time that this Constitution was written was that the federal government was going to take basically all the power from the states. And it was a big fear because these people had just basically became free from the king and the Queen of England, and was trying to protect their sovereignty, right? So when we have a federal government that says, okay, the Federalists want to take all of our power away, they said, wait a second, we've seen this before. We've heard this song before. We're not doing this again. We're not going to grant to you all the power. We're not going to hand to you all of our guns. We want to be able to protect ourselves. And so that was a big concern. And so the states basically agreed on this language because the part of the reasoning was that the states had to supply their own standing military in order for our country, the whole federal deal would work so that we had a standing military in each state, and that the state had their own military that was well regulated by the federal government, because the federal government still reigned supreme. But the states could have their own military and needed to have their own military in case there was a foreign threat as well. So that was the federal justification of having this. So we needed a well-regulated militia, meaning that the federal government regulated a militia so that they could have a standing military in each state. Well, that's my interpretation.
Yeah, and even the concept of a standing army was new, to the new country. And so in the past, the only time that they had a standing army, and they didn't even, in some of the Articles of Confederation and different things like that, they realized that they couldn't just rely on militias. So up until they formed the Continental Army and all that, we just basically had militias that were state, really not even state organized, but just local militias. And we all, we've all seen some of the movies and how the early militias were not really organized. They weren't battle tested, and they ran away from the scene. And so they quickly realized that you had to have some sort of standing army. Because otherwise, if the British were to reinvade or something, that we couldn't just rely on pulling people back out of the farms and doing that. So it was a whole different, their universe was changing at the time, and they realized that they needed this federal standing army. But like you said, the states were still very, very, and the people in the states were very scared or nervous of the power of the federal government. And they even wanted these militias. States wanted to maintain the right to pull back their militias too, to make sure that their own state militia wasn't going to be used against their own state to enforce, enforce actions against them or the federal will. So, yes. So the world was different at the time, and the militias that we think of today, out in Wyoming and North Dakota, South Dakota, are now nowhere near the militias and different things that were, back then.
And it's also important to remember that the federal government could not provide arms to people. And back then, these rifles, people owned themselves. And the first regulation of guns was actually people having to bring their guns to town to show that they worked, just in case, they were needed to be used against a foreign threat. And so that was really the first regulation, was actually just making sure that your gun worked. Imagine bringing your rifle down to the Times Square in Clearwater to show the government, the federal government and your state government, that your gun works, so that if a war did break out, that you could jump right in and be a part of it. So there's been gun regulation, really from the beginning. But there is really a second part to the Second Amendment, which is really the one that's leaned upon the most, where it says after that, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And so when we talk about any type of law regulating gun rights, this is always what people say is, why is it so difficult for you to understand the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed? So we have two parts. We have the first part that's talking about a well-regulated militia. Why is it so? Oh, I'm getting an echo.
No, that was me.
Okay, yeah. So we have a first part and a second part. I think it's important to remember that there was actually out of the 13 state. Well, there's. Let me say this: if you take the first part of the Second Amendment, it's basically advocating a collective right. A collective right meaning not an individual right, but a collective right of people to have a militia in their state and to maintain that militia by everyone or anyone being able to have and bear arms, keep and bear arms. The second part is the right of the people to keep and bear arms, sort of leans more towards an individual right. And the conversation that we're having today over and over and over again in the present time is, do people have an unfettered right, absolute right to bear arms? And it's interesting because when we talked about those 13 different states that had laws, 11 states had the language, and you can look at it. It's easily searchable. You can look at it. But there are about 11 states that were leaned more towards the militia side, that were more of a collective rights, whereas about 2 states really seem to be very unequivocal about this being an individual right. So I think that helps kind of understand the intentions when the Second Amendment was being written. Was it for personal safety, or was it for the state's power to remain sovereign? Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get at the intention of James Madison and the Founding Fathers, right?
And I think, for me, the Second Amendment was much more about state. I mean, this whole idea was about the federal government infringing upon the rights of the state. And so while there are individual mentions or mentions of individual rights, this really was about the federal government interfering with the rights of the states to govern their own affairs. And so, I would take the position that this was more about the militia and just preventing the federal government from telling the states how to protect themselves than it was about, giving people this unfettered right to own any firearm or any arm that they want, whether it be a switchblade or a tank, So.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Virginia Declaration of Rights had a right, and this is where I think the Second Amendment was mostly pulled from. Virginia being probably the biggest, most prominent state back during colonial times. But the Virginia Declaration of Rights from 1777 states that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. That standing armies in a time of peace should be avoided as dangerous to liberty, and that in all cases the military should be under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. So does that change anything to you?
No, I got a little distracted there, but no, I feel that but I mean that it still really was about the militia, though, than it was about, again, this guarantee.
It was really just kind of abbreviated by probably a better writer in James Madison, because you didn't want this to be very wordy, but at the same time, what they end up doing is making it very difficult for anybody to just look at the 4 corners of the document and interpret exactly what he meant by, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27 words. The Second Amendment is made up of 27 words that are so powerful in our society.
Well, and you know what? It's not that it is, and it's it's like I hate to liken it to a Facebook post sometimes, but on Facebook, if you write too many words, the text becomes small and then people won't read it. And but not only that, but you get your point lost. And so and it doesn't leave any sort of room for growth or to change And I think, people, they have this idea of strict constructionist and the black and white letter of the law and what does it actually say. But, there's the other side of this that, maybe it was vague. Maybe the writers weren't quite as detailed because they knew history would change, or they knew that
Right.
life would change, and you'd have to leave room for interpretation for the future.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know that, but you would hope that it was written that way.
Mm-hmm. And who knows? Like we're always trying to figure out exactly what these guys meant when they're writing these. But there's a lot of writings that these guys had. They sat around and wrote every day. They didn't have phones, and so it can really be explored through a lot of different readings. The Vermont Constitution is actually pretty interesting because what the Vermont Constitution did was it was more of an individual right type of state. So what they said was that the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. Now, that's very clear, right? Because we're not just talking about the state being protected against the federal government or foreign threats, but also the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves. Now, that's not the United States Constitution. That is an earlier version of the Vermont Constitution. And as standing armies in the time of peace and dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up, and that the military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power, which is very similar to the Virginia Constitution. So what we see from Vermont is very clearly that people have the right to own guns, and that can't be taken away from them. But does that say the same thing as the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed? Some would argue it does.
Well, but and here's the and this is the other side of a lot of this, is that the world we live in is so entirely different than the world that this was drafted in. When we think about to protect your safety, like they didn't have police forces with SWAT teams and drones and cruisers and body armor and body cameras and all that stuff. There were large areas of the country that had really no police presence, no state presence. People in those days were on their own for a lot, and there was still, not necessarily in the colonies was there, Native Americans and things, but they still are Native American, not things, but in other, the French were still causing trouble in other parts of the country, or in the what became the United States of America. So I mean, there was a lot less, much more lawlessness that was going on back then, where people truly did have to band together and protect themselves. And whether you really call it a militia or just like a neighborhood, like essentially the neighborhood associations back then were militias, because you have this tiny little community. So,
well, couldn't one argue that today, being in a different society, being that things are not the same, that we still do have the same principle that people need to band together and protect one another? Because it just depends on who you are. Some people fear change. Some people fear new cultures. Some people fear immigration, and they feel like that they're being threatened on a daily basis, and they feel that they need to band together to protect one another. So maybe the times have changed, but the principles have stayed the same. Let's address what Justin's saying. I can't read everything he's writing. It just kind of pops up and goes away. Does he have anything? Let's see. The shall not be infringed crowd is just greasing the slippery slopes themselves. How so, Justin? We need to have Justin on the show. He's got a lot to say.
This is the earlier one.
Mm-hmm. So it says, we've already decided that unfettered access is bad, right? We don't give firearms to children. We have a different age limits, handguns and loose guns. We restrict felons from owning firearms. And Justin's exactly right. And that's what the Heller case said. Heller was our most recent and most probably prominent gun rights Supreme Court ruling that was issued from Justice Scalia. And the case involved whether or not the city of Chicago could actually ban people from
DC one.
I believe it was either Chicago or DC. It may have been DC.
Yeah.
You're right. It was DC. It was in that circuit. It was whether or not these people could own guns and possess guns in their own homes. And could Washington, D.C. as a city regulate people from having guns in their own home? And Scalia said, no, absolutely not. That people have the right to own and bear arms. But the interesting part of that ruling, not the dissent, but the ruling, was that guns will continue to be regulated, like Justin said, by age, by mental health, and by things like whether or not you're a felon. And that this is not saying that guns cannot be regulated or infringed upon, but that you can't absolutely stop someone from the right to have a gun without a good reason. So it is settled law that gun regulation is acceptable by the Supreme Court. It's just legislatures aren't really doing it.
Well, I think, and this is where I think all of this stuff, no matter what, it still comes, and this is what we've learned. So, in our face lately is about the composition of the Supreme Court, because that was a 5-4 decision. If that Supreme Court may have been slightly more liberal, that decision would have come down differently.
How would you have voted in that decision? How would you have voted in that case? I know you don't have all the facts in front of you, but how would you have voted in that case? Whether or not that local governments have the ability to completely ban guns in their jurisdiction?
It's hard. I would not personally be in favor of it from a political standpoint. I don't know that of a complete ban. And again, that's just because of where I've come from. But if I lived in a city that had that, I wouldn't feel less safe though. That would just be a decision of whether I wanted to live in a city that had those type of bans or something. I don't necessarily see a problem with enacting it though, I guess either. Mm-hmm. So I don't know from a legal standpoint whether, it's probably harder to justify the total ban of any gun, but I personally wouldn't have a problem if my city made those kind of decisions.
I got to be honest with you. I would. I think that it is a constitutional right, and it's pretty clear in the second part whether or not you're arguing that it is for the purpose of a well-regulated militia being necessary for a free state, that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I think if there's no particular reason why, I'm not a domestic violence abuser, I'm not a felon, I haven't been adjudicated as being mentally incapacitated. Why would someone in the United States, where we live under the United States Constitution, why would a local government ban any gun from? I mean, I know why they would. They want to get rid of all the guns in that particular area in D.C. It was very violent. Still, it's not as violent as it used to be, but it used to be very violent, especially more so during that time. But I don't think it's constitutional. I don't think it jives with the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution that we live under. But when you start talking about gun safety regulations, we start talking about it being a slippery slope, right, Justin? Everyone likes to use that term, slippery slope, because if we make you register, or excuse me, let's go back. If we make you have to undergo a background check, and some of you are saying right now, well, we already have to have a background check. Well, there's a lot of ways of getting around a background check, okay? If you buy a gun from someone online, who's doing the background check? Who's regulating that there is a background check? If you go to a gun show, oftentimes they don't run background checks. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But it is not it is not a good law, and we haven't closed the loopholes in it. And we've been trying for several years to close the gun show loophole, and we've been able to do that despite having 80% approval rating from the American public, which is unheard of for anything having that much support. But the argument always is, well, if they have to run a background check on you, then it's a slippery slope. Next thing you know, they're going to be building a gun registry. And then when they build a gun registry and they know who has a gun, then that puts them in a place where they can start coming taking them from you. So it's just a matter of time. If you let that first one pass, that eventually they're going to take all your guns away from you. And that's what Joe Biden wants to do. And that's what the Democrats want to do. But I don't think it is what they want to do. But can we govern the entire United States the same way on this? Should the laws in Chicago be the same as the laws in Chiefland, Florida? I'm not so sure that one size fits all.
No. No, it doesn't. But the other part of that, well, no, I agree. You can't have the law that obviously, but there are certain laws obviously that can be universal. Having an assault rifle's ban. I have an assault rifle, but is there any? I mean, I have it just because I thought it was neat to have. I don't have it because I feel like I need it for self-defense.
But do you feel like your rights have been violated if someone comes to take that, or if you're told that you cannot have that? I should say, because I don't think anybody's going to come and take it from you.
No, to me now the balance has shifted for me that it's just not worth it. Like if the laws were passed that said assault rifles were banned, I would just turn it in. It's not something that I feel like I need. Again, like there is no real concern about protecting myself from the federal government. I think we've all had that discussion. Like if the federal government was going to turn its forces on its people, my AK-47 really isn't going to do a whole lot when they send a drone after me. I mean, like the reality is
that's a good point.
They have so much overwhelming technology and force that gun is nothing compared to the United States military.
Okay, so the idea behind kind of having the Second Amendment was that the people could have equal access to the type of weaponry that the government had, and that we could band together and fight and have an uprising for a tyrannical federal government. And so now, let's just say this: we created state national guards, right? For each state had their own military, but since then, I don't know if you've noticed, but that's just been incorporated into our federal defense system. So we no longer really have a National Guard the way it was meant to operate when it started. It's used by the federal government, and these people fight in wars all over the world. So we had this in order to match the amount of weaponry that the federal government had. So now let's fast forward from back in the 1700s to now, and the type of things you're talking about: the Apache helicopters, the stealth bombers, the sophisticated weaponry, tanks, and
laser guided,
laser guided missiles, nuclear warheads. So that takes us back to what is the definition of arms, right? Because it says that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What is arms? Everyone just assumes that's guns. But are there more sophisticated arms than just guns? And at what point of guns do you stop? We've talked about pistols, rifles, AR-15s, AK-47s. But then we start getting up to guns that are on, ships and boats, like huge cannons. Those are guns. Do we believe in the right to have those? And even if we did have the right to have those, do we stand any chance against a military whose budget is in the trillions? I mean, at this point, what is the point of continuing to have guns that protect us from a tyrannical government? I mean, besides creating an insurgency that would make it much tougher for the government to come in and occupy us like the British did, we wouldn't put up much of a fight.
No, and that's from the practical standpoint, this stuff is the discussion is somewhat asinine, even that we're going to have these weapons to protect ourselves from the government at this point. It's just the realities of time have changed so dramatically in the last couple hundred years. I think human history, culture, all those kind of things had pretty much grown at a very, very slow rate up until the 1800s. And since then, it's just been, this dramatic rise with technology everywhere. From the digital side to arms, to thought, and even government. The idea of armed conflict is slowly, it's still, there's still a couple out there that are still pursuing that. But from the world perspective, like armed conflict is even, it'll never be gone, but it's less of an option than it ever was.
Right. I mean, taking this from a constitutional view to a more political view, which I said I wasn't going to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. When we see the expansion of the U.S. military, the amount of money that we spend, I think it's 13 times the next highest spender in China. Why isn't that viewed by conservatives as being a show of big government? Wouldn't that be more of a threat, the expansion of government in the military sense, than it would be in other senses? Because we often hear conservatives talk about big government and getting rid of big government, but at the same time they continue to advocate that our military budget get bigger, bigger, and bigger and bigger. So if you're genuine about your worry of the federal government being tyrannical and taking over small individual and state rights, why wouldn't this concern you? Or does it? As a conservative, maybe somebody can point out that this does concern them and that they'd like to see a smaller military budget and maybe get back to more state-run militaries and not a centralized government.
Well, I certainly hope they are not. In my mind, it'd be pretty stupid, but it wouldn't be the first thing conservatives would say.
But does it make sense though that if I'm worried that that the federal government's becoming too powerful, too big, and they're starting to rule over our lives, but at the same time I'm talking out of the other side of my mouth when I'm saying I'm okay with the Pentagon spending unknown amounts of fortunes every year. I mean, some of these things that they've built, some of these planes, they're paying billions and billions of dollars for just like single planes. So I guess if you're arguing that you should have a weapon at this point, it has to be for purposes of self-defense against other individuals. It can't be for fighting against the government because it just doesn't add up anymore. After the Civil War, as you know, black people in the South were freed, and they were facing terror. Yeah, right. During the Reconstruction era, we're facing terror from mobs of people that had guns, and these people wanted to arm themselves. But when they wanted to go to defend themselves and ask for the right to own and operate arms, do you know what they were told? Right? I mean, they weren't given the right of the people to keep and bear arms. So at that point, it did become more of an individual freedom and a right to protect oneself. But my question is, and I'd like to hear from somebody that could come on or maybe write in, where do you draw the line with arms? Or do you draw a line? Do you believe that people should be able to have nuclear warheads in their house, in your neighborhood? I mean, why not? The government has it. And if we're going to stand up against the government, then we need to have the same amount of firepower that they have. I believe that's the argument, especially when you read the history of this.
Well, and the history, though, part of this, too, is that up until that Heller case, the Supreme Court had generally said that it didn't have an individual right. And so the Supreme Court, it's through most of American history, like we didn't have this individual right. Some of these books have been on the laws. We've had these, as we've talked about, gun restrictions on the books. It really wasn't until that case finally made its way to the Supreme Court that this individual right. I also was doing some reading about how the NRA has obviously fashioned this whole debate, and how in the 80s and in different decades they spent millions of dollars to pay attorneys or to pay law school professors and different things to write articles in law reviews, and that law reviews are not peer reviewed or anything. They're just students or people who want to write something. And so they have, the NRA it's been a campaign for decades that kind of culminated in that case. And so you have this idea that, and this is where some of the discussion earlier was like, you have these strict constructionists or the originalists, as they want to call them, and then you have the belief that and I guess that's a secondary argument to what because the secondary argument is that the Constitution is a living, breathing document. And just because it said these are the words that were written back then doesn't mean that those words should have the same meaning that they had back then. And it has to be looked at through today's world and not just looked at through the narrow myopic view of what did those people think back then, because there's just no way that they could have conceived that what they started would come to where we are today. Like, it's just impossible.
Mm-hmm. And why is it such a bad idea to think that maybe a constitutional right could be outdated? I think we've sort of come to that conclusion a lot with religion, that, you know, the Catholic Church has changed over the years through lots of resistance through the church, but eventually they've gotten certain people like Pope Francis who have come out and said things that we never thought we'd hear a pope say about religion, and that some of the rules, you know, are a little bit draconian.
Weren't they stoning people back in the biblical days? We don't do that anymore, do we?
No, of course they are. I mean, you can also argue that the Constitution said that slavery was okay, and that. So, I mean, while I have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution as a member of the Florida Bar, I really think that sometimes, you know, we need to rethink things. We got to think out of the box a little bit in terms of what would be best suited. I'm not against guns. I'm not against gun rights, and I never have been. I was raised around guns just like you were. I've never been a big gun owner. I never really found the fun in having a gun outside of being a little kid and playing with toy guns. But I've considered buying a gun. I'm considering buying a gun now, but I don't feel like I need one. Dan thinks that conservatives have read the Constitution.
That was an article I read, so maybe they haven't. But I agree with you. It does seem silly sometimes when you hear these people talking about the Constitution, and you wonder if they've ever actually read it. You know, lots of people like to throw out that, especially when they have flags now that I don't know if you've noticed, but some of the people who used to carry those Trump flags now have these "Don't Tread on Me" flags. They're driving around with these pickup trucks up in your neck of the woods, I think now.
Yeah, they are
the Second Amendment,
the Brothers of Liberty.
You know, like the Second Amendment flag. Like, that's the part of this that I don't understand.
There's a Second Amendment flag?
Yes, yeah, like a Second Amendment flag.
What does that look like? And do we have a Third Amendment flag?
No, I've only seen the second. Essentially, it's like the 13 stars, and it's got a second, you know, the number 2 in there and kind of stuff. So I'm sure there's 1,000 iterations of that. But yes, there are people that have Second Amendment flags.
Well, I mean, I like to call these people a lot of times they're cafeteria constitutionalists. They go and pick and choose the constitutional amendments that they like, and then they literally fly a flag for those constitutional rights. But the other ones, you know, they don't seem to be as important. Well, but my understanding of the Constitution is sort of like the Bible. All the commandments have the same amount of power and the same weight. So why we value some but not others is sort of contradictory to the whole point.
Well, and I think what you said, you know, what we discussed earlier about like this, the idea that we're not defending ourselves from the federal government here. Like, that's just the reality. That's not happening. So what, you know,
I mean, do we even have to? And is that really a concern? I mean, it could be. And I know that the present time doesn't always signify what's going to happen later, and having those safeguards in order. But having a gun, right, is not going to protect us against, 500 tanks coming over the hill, and we're out there shooting it with our 22s.
People are holding up this Second Amendment flag as if we need these weapons to protect ourselves. I mean, like, that's the biggest argument, is that we need these guns to protect ourselves from an overbearing federal government. I mean, I hear that from these people all the time.
But it's not that. It's not that, though. It's not an overbearing federal government. It's a changing world that doesn't look like the world that they live in.
No, I know. I'm just saying that's their argument, though.
That's certainly what they say. They also say that they're enacting federal or local election laws because there's election fraud, right? So we've got to have a scapegoat for everything that we do. That's not necessarily true, but it seems to make more sense if we say, well, we're going to change the election laws in Georgia and make it harder for people to vote because there's a lot of fraud going on. Well, no, there's not. And you're doing it to win. You're doing it to
Well,
gain leverage. But I want to know somebody who gets a Third Amendment flag. The Third Amendment, which was written at the right around the same time as the Second Amendment, says that no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Do you have a flag for that one?
no.
Yeah. See, these are the types of things that they were thinking about back in
Well,
1789.
they were practical back then, right? I mean, they actually had a practical reason for putting these things in back then.
They were addressing problems of the day, right? They were addressing problems of the day, but we can't change the Constitution to address problems of our day. But why? Why is that? Why can't we agree that the Constitution in some areas needs to change? I mean, we had amendments, right? That's what an amendment is a change. And so at some point along the way, we made amendments to change the Constitution. So why couldn't we do that again? And in some countries, they actually enumerate your rights. They actually write out what your rights are. In this country, you have to try to just figure them out through intentions of someone 200 and some years ago.
Well, and I think that, and that what you just said, though, that's the again, like we're dealing with reality. A lot of the countries that have achieved independence since the United States have used the U.S. Constitution as at least a starting point. And I think they may have realized some of the issues that we've had with our own Constitution. And you could see that these things are, and we talk like the Bible seems to be more changing than our Constitution. You can leave that up to more interpretation than the Constitution. I mean, we've got 1,000 different divisions of Christianity here that all read the same text, but have a different interpretation for it. And so,
yeah, it's a sacred document that it's like the Magna Carta. It's not ever subject to ever being changed. Someone had just noted on the Facebook post that military grade weapons should not be covered by the Second Amendment. I can see somebody listening going, says who? But what is a military, military style weapon? But how do you define a military style weapon? Where is the law? Where is the line drawn? Because there's a lot of weapons that the military has that I'm allowed to get my hands on right now that I could get very legally. But then there are others that aren't even made for my use. But can I make it at home? Can I make a bomb at home?
No,
I don't think I can. By the way,
but it's not legal, right? I mean,
should I?
Well, and that's the the thing with the gun that I have here on my left. It's a bolt action rifle. So not only every time, just like most hunting rifles would be.
Explain what a bolt action rifle is.
That's so the bolt, it means every time you fire it, you actually have to pull the bolt back, discharge the casing, and then reload another one. So it's a lot faster than the musket, of course. But
you're like,
it's not just a simple pull of the trigger. And that is where the AK-47, the AR-15, and the other semi-automatic rifles. Now, obviously, there are fully automatic versions of those that are used for war. The semi-automatic is just a trigger pull, but that gun will fire as quickly as you can move your finger, a quarter of an inch or whatever it is. And so you can go pretty quick. And as we saw, this AR style rifle, it killed 10 people pretty quickly. And the magazine rounds obviously are different for hunting rifles. I believe hunting rifles, they can only carry 3 rounds in a magazine. So, and those are usually bolt action as well, most hunting rifles.
There are different, and I'm asking you really, different weapons that are used for hunting animals as opposed to killing people. And what are the difference? What are the differences? I mean, wouldn't the guns just look alike or be alike, have the same capacity?
No, usually your rounds for shooting people are generally a little smaller, because hunting rounds are generally taking out bump stops. Yeah. But hunting rounds are usually taking out larger animals, whether it be a bear or a deer, large deer, as opposed to and there's a difference in that. I guess it's just a matter of there's velocity. Hunters are usually, more. I guess the difference is technology has changed. The rifles used to be more for closer, or the automatic weapons were made for more closer quarters so that you could spray as much, ammunition or bullets as you can over a field. But we don't fight wars over a field either. And so now the guns have become much better at longer range than they are at necessarily spreading, bullets around. So the AK-47 is great at spreading bullets in a confined area, but it's maybe not as good when you're trying to shoot somebody from 300-400 yards away. And that's that.
Interesting.
The military, not theory, but the military practices obviously is engage people as far away as you can and keep your soldiers out of as harm's way as possible. So I mean, the goals of war have changed too.
Right. Well, that's why to me it just doesn't make much sense that there's a bill in the
grenades around.
I'm sorry?
They're not allowed to have grenades either.
No, I mean, where do you draw the line? And why is it that the NRA and certain gun rights groups want to continue? And if you're in those groups, explain to me. I still would like to know an explanation as to why. Like, for instance, right now, there is a bill proposed in Florida and many other states, and it has been proposed throughout the last 5 or 6 legislative sessions to allow guns to be on college campuses. So this would allow college kids who live in dorms, who live in fraternity houses, sorority houses, and such, to have firearms in their dorms or on college campuses, even in classes. What is the point of that? I mean, is it necessary? I mean, what is the argument there that we need to have guns on college campuses? I don't get it. Is it just because we think that the Second Amendment is so absolute, even though Heller and the late Justice Scalia has told us that it's not, and that the continuation of gun regulations will go on? But why are we wasting our time doing this with taxpayer monies and our representatives in Tallahassee? Why is it so important that they keep doing this, even though it fails every time? And it doesn't fail because it's been voted on and lost. It fails because the leaders of committees will not bring it to a vote in the Senate. And so it gets to a certain point and then peters out every year. But why do we keep doing that?
Well, I think the answer to that is the same answer to this question here. Why are we producing bullets that are capable of penetrating Kevlar vest? And it's money. Lobbyists are obviously contributing to people's campaigns. Lobbyists expect, whether they will, obviously they won't admit it, but lobbyists expect something for their return. And, absolute support of, or absolute prohibition against any gun regulation is one of the NRA's essential preconditions for accepting money. And so they have an entire, as many organizations do, report cards. As far as, and if you don't get an AA+++, you will be primaried, in a Republican primary. So somehow this right to bear arms, this right to prevent government takeover has become essentially the most important right, as opposed to the right to free assembly, the right to speech, the right to vote. Like you said, not you said, but in Florida, we have a law that has been proposed that would make some of these protests illegal. Where if you block the road, you'd be committing a felony, different things like that. And so, people have no concern. They'll say, oh, but at least as long as we have guns. Like, well, these other rights are way more important in today's world because the federal government is not going to overtake us. Like that's, that's their big argument. And the federal government, or not but our other rights are being, taken away from us. Just so that these people can have their right to have guns everywhere, and that's part of a frustrating thing for me.
Why is it that the Second Amendment is so important, but the other amendments aren't? I mean, we're infringing upon people's right to vote as quickly as we can. I mean, it's literally the agenda for the Republican Party right now is to make it tougher to vote, and
to stop free speech and to stop people from saying, and speaking out. I mean, as absurd as it, and obviously the absurdity of the Georgia lawmaker who was possibly charged with a felony because she continually knocked on the door of the governor while he was trying to sign that bill into law. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how are they charging? I mean, that's what I read, so I don't know if they actually did charge her with a felony, but it just seems to be absurd. We're charging people for felonies, yet we're taking away people's right to vote or making it harder to vote.
Yeah, I think you're speaking of what happened yesterday at Governor Brian Kemp's office in Georgia, where they had just passed a sweeping bill to, what I think adds up as voter suppression
Mhm.
to make it more difficult for certain people to be able to vote. Florida, or not Florida, but Georgia basically said that, we're not going to lose another election like this. This was ridiculous. I mean, we're the laughing stock of the conservative country and world that they lost those 2 Senate seats.
You know what's
And
scary about that though is Kemp, the governor, was the one who actually a lot of Democrats, independents, progressives, whatever, thought, oh, Kemp is standing up to Trump. He's not going to just bow to the all this nonsense anymore. Even though his own Secretary of State, him and his Secretary of State both said there was no election fraud in Georgia, no problems whatsoever. So I think there was at least some. I thought, well, maybe this will be one of those few Republicans that'll actually do the right thing and not sign this. No, he folded, and so I think that to me it's a big lesson to anybody that thinks that any Republican is going to do the right thing when it comes to this. They just they can.
I think it says a lot that it was signed behind closed doors. To me, it was one of those pinch your nose and do it type of things. But it's a very interesting to me, the types of things that they put in there that were just blatantly meant to impact certain people.
Isn't there no early voting on Sunday now? I know that was proposed.
Yeah, I believe they took out the early voting that would impact the souls to the polls, where a lot of black churchgoers will vote after church, and it's a big organized event on the first and the last Sunday of early voting. I know in Florida they once took out one of the days, but they left one. But the one right before elections, they took that one out. But I believe it's since been added back. But another thing that they did was they limited the powers in Georgia of the Secretary of State, because I guess it's his fault that that not enough votes came out for the Republican side, and the fact that that particular Secretary of State did not do what he was asked to do fairly blatantly, if you ask me, over the phone by President Trump. His position's being neutered. And to me, that's just kind of funny. It's not. How is that going to make things better? How is that going to help their chances of winning just because this guy did his job?
No, it's very frustrating, and that I think the other, and again, some of these are silly and they sound silly, but like giving people water, right? Like I've been at precincts here in Florida, it gets freaking hot out there, and I can guarantee you that people waiting in line don't care whether you had they might care, but you're not going to change someone's vote by giving a bottle of water. The people who are standing in line are standing there because they want to vote for the person they're going to vote for. They're not standing in line thinking, I wonder who I'm going to vote for today. Well,
what if you were providing water or food to people who've been standing in line for 5 hours, but you weren't there openly supporting another candidate? What if you're just there and you've got a shirt on like I do that's a Buccaneers t-shirt, right? Go Bucks. And I want to provide some Little Caesars pizza to college students who are standing in line for 3 hours to vote, which I've done before. And I've provided pizza, water, and all kind. We've even provided entertainment for these people because we don't want them to leave the line. We want them to vote. We don't know who they're going to vote for. Hopefully they vote for our candidate. And in the places that we go, yeah, they probably will vote for our candidate. It's most likely that they will. But why not make it easier for those people to vote? I mean, I know why. I don't even know why I'm asking the question. It's just blatant. It's blatant voter suppression. And I think it's the biggest. It's one of the top 3 biggest threats to our democracy in this country is voter suppression, gerrymandering, and campaign finance. The money in campaigns right now, and I think those 3 things collectively are going to bring our democracy to its knees if we don't address it in the next 5 to 10 years.
But we'll have our guns. Like that is and that is what makes this whole argument and this whole thing so frustrating, is that the people are willing to throw away every single thing else so that they can have their guns, and somehow they feel that having their guns is going to make life all better, or that they can protect everything. I mean, you think about again, it has nothing, but like Donald Trump is no longer on Facebook or Twitter. Whether he had a gun or not didn't make a difference, right? Like that doesn't, he has no voice on Twitter or Facebook, thank God. But like the reality, him having a gun didn't make a difference. And you can silence people, especially in today's world. Like without the media or without a media outlet, you have no voice. And so silencing someone's voice, it's just, because you'll hear the people, well, without guns, we got no rights. Well,
I just want to be clear from the very get-go that I am not against people owning guns. I don't think I know anybody that's against people owning guns, Americans owning guns. The problem is that there are crazy people that own guns, and we allow them to get their hands on guns, and we make it easier for them to get guns than we make it easy than we do to vote. It should be easier to vote than it is to get a gun. Because your vote can be dangerous, but it's not going to kill anybody. But let people vote. It's just that it does need to be regulated in some fashion to keep us all safer. But I'm not against people owning guns.
Like
that's never been an issue.
Like most guns on the street, maybe not most, but a lot of the guns on the street are stolen from people's cars.
Mm-hmm.
Like people are just effing idiots. They leave their gun in their car. They leave their car unlocked. Somebody opens their car. They look in the glove box. Oh my God, there's a 9mm. So a lot of the guns that are used in crimes, like we hear this stuff about, oh, they're from the black market, or there are these Saturday night specials or whatever. No. The stupid kid down the street opened someone's car and found a gun, and he told somebody about it, and they said, I can give you $50 for that. And now it's on the street.
Yeah. So there are more handguns in this country than there are people. And there's just no reason for that. There's no reason for there to be guns on every corner and accessible to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that wants a gun. So
again, back in those days, like we did not have a professional police force. Like the idea of having a professional police force back in the 1700s was non-existent. Like it wasn't even a concept to do that. And so we don't live in a lawless society. We don't live on the frontier.
Mm-hmm.
We don't live next to bordering countries that we're at war with anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that we need these, weapons of war is just, completely outdated and unnecessary anymore.
Like it's not for protection. It's a toy. No one needs it. But there's a lot of things we don't need,
and they're dangerous. That's the thing. It's not like a car. Like if you leave your car in the garage, there's really no chance. And if somebody steals it, they might, but they're not going to mow down 10 people.
You got to have a key to it, right? You got to have a key to unlock it.
Yeah.
And then you got to get it out of the garage. I was always thought it was a pretty good idea to have to be required to have gun insurance. If you own a gun, you have to buy insurance. If somebody gets killed with that gun, then you have to have insurance to cover it. The insurance industry would love it. But we do this for cars. And the representative, the senator from Kennedy from Louisiana said, why can't we, we have car accidents, thousands and thousands of car accidents every year, but we don't ban cars. Well, we don't ban guns either, but we regulate them. We regulate cars. We make you register every car. We make you get insurance for a car.
I don't need a gun. That's the stupidity of that argument, is that you need a car to actually go to the airport. You need a car to go to the beach. You need a car to go anywhere that's within, well, for me, I can go like 5 or 10 miles, but like most people, like they can't go more than a half mile without getting in their car. So like car's necessary. Like I can go to the grocery store for the next, well, maybe that's a bad example because of Colorado, but I should be able to go to the grocery store the rest of my life without ever needing a gun.
Right. Well, it's a terrible example because cars are probably vehicles are probably the most regulated thing we have. Everywhere we go, there's something regulating our ability to drive. Stoplights, right? Is that socialism? Stop signs. We have to have a driver's license. We have to have driver's insurance, or a driver's license, and we have car insurance.
Yeah.
I think it was 38,000 people lost their lives in car accidents in 2019. I'd like to know what the gun deaths in 2019 were. Let's see, gun deaths in 2019.
And here's the thing about cars too, right? Like I can anonymously report you to the DMV and say that you have dementia and you need to have your, checkup, and and they'll send a letter to you that says you need to go to the doctor and get us a note that says you don't have dementia. Like it's, what I'm saying? Like, so there's these fallbacks, whereas those things don't exist for if you see somebody who's acting funny, like you can't just say, call the police and say, hey, somebody needs to check this guy out,
Right.
or mental health, because there's, you just can't require it. But like you said, if they had a license or if they had some sort of registration, you could, because if you want to hold that license, you need to be able to comply to these different,
I'll tell you, one of the biggest no-nos and the biggest things that gun rights activists talk about is a gun registry. There shall be no gun registry. And that is something that I literally think a war would be started, not over banning guns, but just creating a gun registry. I think there would be a war in this country over, because not only will they not allow background checks, because they think background checks will lead to gun registries, which they don't, because they promise to get rid of all that information as soon as it comes through. But the fear is that they're going to keep that information, know who has guns, because if they create a gun registry, you know exactly what's next. They come take your guns.
And that's, when you, that movie Red Dawn,
Yeah, I was going to bring that up earlier. If you believe in Red Dawn, then yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the stupidity of this, because even in that movie, like, there are so many people in the United States. Like, the number of people or military personnel or police that would have to occupy Pinellas County, right? Like, to go door to door in Pinellas County, thinking that you're going to take people's guns away. Like, that is the most asinine thing ever. Like, there's just,
we can't even get people to wear masks. How are we going to take people's guns away? It's not going to happen.
Freaking vaccinate people,
Right. Like, it's not going to happen. Plus, we don't have Patrick Swayze. If we have Patrick Swayze, anything's possible. But he's dead now, so it's not the same. Yeah. Well, hopefully somebody learned something today. I know that I did. So, good conversation about a touchy topic. We didn't have any people call in and yell at us and threaten to kill us. At least not yet. My door shut to my office.
I didn't put the number up. I was smart enough. Now we might have some voicemails at the office, but
I don't think we said anything too crazy, controversial. I don't think either one of us is on board for taking anybody's guns away. I just think making it a little safer for people who live out there to be able to go to school, go to the grocery store, and not have to worry about some crazy gunman coming in. It is worth mentioning that we talked about background checks, and the gentleman, and not a gentleman, but the a-hole in Colorado who killed 10 people had recently passed a background check to buy his weapon that he used to kill a lot of the people that were involved. So it's not saying that some of these regulations are going to stop gun violence, but it's like seatbelts, man. It's gonna slowly make it a little bit better. And if we can continue to do the right things that have been used in other countries and other places, maybe we can start to see a trend downward and not upward like we're seeing. So that's the only idea.
Well, what do you think is more likely, a ban on, well, I shouldn't say a ban, well, an assault rifle ban, or like a poison like symbol on a can of Coke? So which one of those, like, do you think is likely?
I didn't see that coming
first? I
did not see that coming. I think that neither are going to happen in our lifetime.
Because, I mean, I would like to say a ban on sugar, but I mean, that's, now I'm being completely ridiculous.
Yeah, you're getting off topic.
Rifles or ban sugar,
Yeah, no, sugar kills more people, I'm sure, every year. But I mean, people are free to regulate themselves to a certain degree, but we have to do what we have to do to keep our kids safe and to keep our family safe, so that we could just at least go about living our lives and pursue happiness without having to worry about getting gunned down at school. I mean, that's what scares me.
And I know most people who are listening are not probably very conservative, but I would love to hear somebody. Let's see some examples where AK-47s or AR-15s like were used in the United States like successfully for self-defense. Like I'd really like to know those situations where they had like multiple intruders like coming into the home, and thank God they had their 30-round magazine with
Yeah.
an AR-15, and they were able to take them down. Or when when the zombies start coming.
Yeah.
And I think that's this mentality. Like there's really people who think like, well, I don't know, like what if the zombies attack? Like I need to have like this gun to take them out and shoot them in the head. Like this is.
Well, if these are the same people that are receiving QAnon drops who think that Democrats are baby eating pedophiles, I really would rather not even have a debate with them, because it's just, what are you going to do?
That's why I unfriend those people on Facebook, because I refuse.
Yeah, it's just not an argument that's worth having. Life is short.
All right. Well, next week we'll talk about banning sugar.
All right.
Just kidding. I don't want to lose all of our 2 listeners out there. I don't want to lose those. So,
I'm gonna go get some ice cream.
Yeah. No ice cream, but yeah. So, anyway, so we usually wrap this up talking a bit about the weekend. Whatever. Anything happening?
No, might go see some old friends from high school this evening. So I might go down to Indian Rocks Beach. That's the hope, but nothing, not much planned. Just hoping that my mother-in-law doesn't have COVID. She hasn't been feeling well, so she should be getting her test back today or tomorrow. So we're just hoping that she's okay, and I get my vaccination on Monday.
Well, on that note, 40 and up start Monday.
Yeah, I've signed up as soon as they announced it. Yeah, I'm gonna get my vaccine
after that, the week after. So
yeah, gonna get my vaccine. What do you got? Where are you yogiing this week, Yogi?
Okay. I will be yogiing at the Safety Harbor Market on Main, 10 o'clock. Free.
All right.
Free. So
hopefully you're getting more flexible.
Tuesdays at the Dunedin Causeway, the Honeymoon Island. So it's done by Muddy Mantra. I believe that's it. So
very interesting.
That's a little bit more difficult than the Sunday stuff. Sunday stuff, a little bit more flexibility and stuff, a little bit more planking and all that stuff. So
planking, I remember that was cool.
Yeah.
Well, let me throw out a quick plug. I own a trivia company where we do pub trivia at a lot of local bars and restaurants and a lot of breweries. We do a lot of local craft breweries. But if you get a chance, go to our site at bigtrophytrivia.com and click on where to play. And you can see a map of, I think we have about 12 or 13 different locations now. We'll probably get up to 15 by next week. So we're really growing, and we have a really good time. So come out to one of our locations and play some trivia. And if you'd like to host, we're looking for some hosts to trivia. We pay our hosts, and we provide them everything they need, questions and all that stuff. So it's a good little side gig to do in the evenings and get out and meet people. And we try to keep you safe and away from everybody too.
I think as things open up, you're going to be busier than you ever have. So.
I think so. That's the hope, though. It's better than the alternative.
Yes, absolutely. So, all right, everybody, we really appreciate you. We know you got like 200. There's like 2 billion people out there. There's a million other things that you could do, and we really appreciate you guys spending your time with us. You all have a good weekend, and we will see you next Friday.
Go Bucks. Go Herd.
Go Lightning. Go Rays.